In the special meeting at 5 o'clock. Roll call, please.
Susan Smith present.
Marcia Locke present.
Jesus Holguin present.
DJ Johnson present.
Carol Peden present.
Martin Rex Kidziora present.
Robert Verdi present.
Xana Lopez present.
Maribel Maddox present.
Thank you very much. Now on to A2, Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Kidziora.
Mr. Peden, I was going to ask if Dr. Verdi would lead us in the pledge.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
His children are watching, I think, so I want them to see their father do this.
If I can measure up, Dr. Kidziora. So join me in the salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance
To the
flag
flag
of the United States
of
of America,
America and to the
To the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Dr. Verdi.
You're welcome.
Great job, Dr. Verde.
Thank you.
All right, on to item B, public comments on agenda items. Anyone wishing to speak to any item on the agenda item may do so at this time. Individual speakers shall be allowed to speak for 3 minutes on any agenda item. The Board of Education shall limit the total time for public input on each agenda item to 21 minutes. Board Bylaw 9323B, Section 5. Per Board Bylaw 9323, twice the allotted time will be provided to a member of the public utilizing a translator. Claudia, do we have any public comments at this time?
No public comments.
Okay, thank you very much. On to action items. Item C1, approval of resolution 2020-21-67 in support of a waiver request on statewide assessments. Dr. Kidziora, can you help us out with this item here?
Yes, the superintendents of Riverside County have met, and one of the things they asked us to do was to work together to let the State Board of Education know that we would like flexibility in the assessments this year, mainly the CASP testing, because of people being in distance learning and hybrid models. It's very challenging and difficult to give a standardized test in the settings that all districts have, not just the ones who are in distance learning, but even in a hybrid model because of the time it takes, the standardized practices and methods that have to be in place. And so this resolution is in alignment with the other 22 districts in Riverside County and signifies that our board supports this flexibility, and this will be given to the State Board of Education to support this effort to make sure that assessments are the local education authorities' option of what they choose to pursue this year.
Hey, Dr. Kidziora, board, is there any discussion on this item before we call for a roll call vote? Or a motion, I'm sorry.
I guess I have one question, which has nothing to do with my vote, but what if the State Board of Education doesn't do that and we have to have testing?
Well, then we'll have to have testing. But we're hoping that we're hoping that through these efforts that they're listening and that they're reading these resolutions and seeing the boards of education from all the districts supporting this. And it's a unified effort, not just in Riverside County, but in the 1,100 school districts in the state of California.
Well, they say they appreciate local control, so we'll find out. I'll just say I support this resolution. Any other discussion? Board Member Holguin?
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, wonderful. Let's go for it.
I move we approve the resolution number 2020-2167 as presented.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Locke,
Aye.
Mr. Holguin,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Peden.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, we are on item C2, award of request for proposal number 20-21-12 internet service provider. Ms. Lopez, can you help us out with this one?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Peden. The next two items are in relationship to E-rate or education rate, which is a federal program that provides school, libraries, and consortia funding for two types of categories for services. The first one is Category 1, or internet services or internet access. And then there's a Category 2 that deals with internal connections, basic maintenance of internal connections. And this amount of funding depends on the number of free and reduced students that our district has. And with E-rate, we would be able to get up to 90% discounted pricing for Category 1 and up to 85% of discounts for Category 2. So we have two items, the first one for Category 1 and then the second one for Category 2.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Board, is there any discussion on this item?
So both of these pertain to internet service?
The first one is internet service provider. And then the second one is for the maintenance of the internal connection. So like service of our servers.
Okay.
Okay, there's no further discussion on item C2. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the award for request of proposal number 2021-12 as presented.
I'll second it.
Second, roll call.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Locke,
Aye.
Mr. Holguin.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Peden.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. Moving on to C3, award of request for proposal number 20-21-13, E-rate. Is that 24, correct? Did that correctly? Yes. Basic maintenance of internal connections. Ms. Lopez, you have anything further to add?
No, this would be for Category 2. So this is for the maintenance of internal connections.
Great, thank you. Any other further discussion, board?
Yeah, did you have to brush up on your Roman numerals for that?
I thought really hard about it. I was like, I can't get this wrong. I'm getting really close. I was starting to sweat a little bit. Is there a motion?
I'll like to make the motion.
Okay, is there a second?
I second the motion.
Second by Dr. Locke. Roll call.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Locke,
Aye.
Mr. Holguin.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Peden.
Aye, motion carries 5-0. All right, moving on to C4, second interim financial report. Ms. Lopez.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Peden. I'm going to share my screen to bring up the presentation. Okay, so thank you and good afternoon, good evening. And we're going to talk about and review our 2021 second interim financial report. So first, when we take a look at the 11 commitments, and in the business department, always starting with why, business services is committed to ensuring that our financials are managed accurately, efficiently, and ethically, because we know that ultimately it will affect the education that's provided to the students that we work with. We also work with other departments and stakeholders in ensuring our policies and processes support the priorities of the district. We also need to maintain fiscal solvency in order to have the resources that are necessary to meet the vision and mission statements of the district. So when we take a look at our interim financial reporting, Education Code requires that each district file interim report periods, 2 of them at a minimum each fiscal year. This evening, we're going to be reviewing our second interim report, which is financial information, actuals as we refer to them, as of January 31st. And this report is due to our COE no later than 45 days after the period closes, which would be March 17th. This gives the district, county, state, and stakeholders an opportunity to look at the district's financial status. And with each of our reports, we are presenting actual information through January 31st in this case, but we are projecting totals through June 30th or the end of the fiscal year. When you take a look at the certification, there's 3 different types of certification that a district will have. The first one could be a positive certification. This means that as a district, we will be able to meet our financial obligations, not only for current year, but also for 2 subsequent years. A qualified certification means that the district may not meet its financial obligations for current or 2 subsequent years. And a negative certification is that the district is unable to meet it for the current year. This evening, I am pleased to report that we are going to be recommending a positive certification for our second interim report. This slide shows you a 10-year snapshot of our enrollment. So when you take a look at it, the graphs or the bars in gray are the actual numbers. So 13, 14 through 2021. Please note that for the current year of 2021, we decreased almost 700 students over prior year. This was greater than the amount that we had averaged in the previous 6 years, which was around 300. We're not quite sure if some of it was as a result of natural decline or some of it was related to the pandemic. But in looking at our out years, which we are required to do, in looking at our multi-year projections, we are projecting a decrease of 450 for each of the next 2 subsequent years. And you see those indicated in blue. As part of Senate Bill 98, there was a hold harmless provision that was given to school districts. This provided protection to districts. So what it did in a sense, it delayed the impact, or it delayed that revenue impact for declining enrollment districts. So if you take a look at this, you can see that in 1920, there's an ADA figure. That same funded ADA is the ADA that we are using to calculate revenues for both 2021 and 21-22. So it's this added protection. And this was a result of them asking for additional compliance items, engagement reports, a protection of several categories as a result of the pandemic as well. So for 3 years, we were able to use that 1920 ADA. And that's important to know, because when we're looking at our multi-year projection in regards to revenues, we're not really getting a true picture of what they would be. So we have to understand why the revenues aren't declining until 22-23, which is referred to as a year when the cliff will happen for most districts. These are the major assumptions that we used in projecting our revenues. These assumptions were updated based on the information that was provided with the January governor's budget proposal, which was that first snapshot of what the 21-22 picture might look like. One of the things that I want to bring your attention to is that first row of the funded COLA, at first interim, the COLA was projected to be 0% for all 3 years. The governor's budget proposal, however, reflects a projected COLA for 21-22, as well as 22-23. The interesting part about 21-22, and the reason why that percentage is higher, is that he's proposing that the COLA that was not received in current year be applied to next year so that they can catch us up in regards to the COLA. Other thing I want you to take a look at is the average daily attendance. And in the previous slide, when I referred to that cliff, you can see that when you look at the ADA for 2021 and 21-22, there's a decline of over 1,000, and that's because of that 3-year protection. So you can see that reflected there. Our ADA percentage for 2021, in a sense, looks higher than what it really is. And that's just, again, as a result of SB 98, because we're using a prior year attendance to calculate it to the enrollment. And again, you can see the enrollment decrease of 450 carried over in each of the 3 years. When we take a look at our assumptions on the expenditure side, For current year, we see percentages, not a number of actual costs because they are already part of our budget. But for the out years, you can see what the percentages are for things like step and column, and then what that dollar amount is. So these are numbers that we add or subtract in our multi-year projections. And again, the rates for the STRs and the PERS were updated based on the latest information provided with the governor's January budget proposal. So now as we take a closer look, we can look at what has changed really since the last time we reviewed our financials. And in this case, that was at the first interim report back in December. And so what I've done is I've broken down each of the categories so that you can see where the variances are. So when we take a look at the unrestricted general fund, and again, this is our operational budget, you can see that our local control funding formula sources have increased about $1 million since first interim. And other than that, the changes to state revenues and local revenues are minimal. So as a whole, on the unrestricted side, we are now projecting to receive an additional $1 million in revenues, higher than where we were at first interim. This $1 million difference is tied to our unduplicated pupil percentage. Now we have an actual percentage for current year. At first interim, it was still an estimate. That percentage of UPP, which is for our foster youth, English learners, and free and reduced, increased about 0.5%. And so that's what generates the additional $1 million. Taking a look now at our expenditures, there's a lot more things happening on the expenditure side. And when we take a look at where we were at first interim, and now we are today, or we project to be at the end of the year based on second interim, you can see that the amounts in black, these amounts signify savings. So we have approximately $6 million between the first three categories, which are certificated and classified salaries, as well as the corresponding benefits. This is as a result of savings due to vacant positions, savings from substitute costs, extra duty, and overtime. So we are very aware that because students are not in the classroom, there's expenses that are not occurring. In addition to that, there's also savings on the books and supplies and services and operating expenditures. A lot of contracts aren't needed because we don't utilize the services. We have savings from utilities. And so we've accounted for all of this. And you can see that overall, we're projecting to have $18.7 million less in expenditures. I do want to point out that of this amount, 12.6 are tied or are expenditures that were included in the LCAP and our supplemental and concentration funding. The reason I point this out is that because these are savings specific to supplemental and concentration, these are funds that next year will still need to be spent on meeting the purposes of LCAP or supplemental and concentration funding. So these are one-time savings.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, so where would we find that page 11 in the book, in the report?
Page 5.
Page 5.
And if you look at page 5, you'll be able to see what has actually been spent to date, which is something that you don't see here on this slide, but you can see all the categories, what the budget is today, what we've spent to date, what we project to spend by June 30th, and then the difference. So all of that is reflected there on page 5.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Susanna, I have a question as well.
Sure.
On the utility savings, what did we do to garner that savings? And I mean, was that something that we did on purpose? We just backed away a little bit, and this is the results. So, Can you kind of explain that, please?
Well, you know, in regards to utilities, our campuses, our facilities are not being used to the extent where they're used if students were in session. And so at the beginning of the year, we had projected only half a year's worth. And so we were waiting to capture savings as time went by. But obviously not as many things are being used. You know, campuses, a lot of the classrooms are dark. And so that's where the savings come into play.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Kind of thought that, but I wasn't sure. I thought we did something on purpose. All right, go ahead.
So on this slide, continuing on the unrestricted, and this is taking a look at the transfers in and out. And so when you take a look at the transfers out, this is the contribution to the charter school. And so obviously there's less activity too. And so we are reducing that contribution from 552,000 to a little under 400,000. So that's generating savings. And then also the contribution to special education and routine repair maintenance. The expenditures are not as high in those two programs. And so we have generated or are projecting to generate additional savings from that. So combined, it's about $700,000 in savings. So now that we've looked at all of the categories in detail, when we look at our multi-year projections, this is again, current year and 2 subsequent years. This is what's required by law, even though we do have internal calculations that go beyond that 3rd year. And if you look at the 21-22 revenues, you can see a pretty high increase from current year to next year. That's because we're applying the COLA, remember? And we still have the hold harmless in regards to the ADA. So that's going to generate additional revenues for next year, which we were not anticipating at first interim. However, in 22-23, that's where the cliff comes into play. And you can see that the revenues are decreasing again. When we take a look at the expenditures, in regards to the expenditures, in 2021, we are recognizing the savings. However, all of these savings for vacant positions, substitutes, extra duty, expenses that did not take place are one time. We have to add all of that back to our budget for next year because we're assuming everything is restored. And so that's why you see an increase to our expenditures. And then in 22-23, you continue to see an increase for things like step and column, the increase to the STRS and PERS rate, and so forth. And so that's where you're seeing why you continue to see the increases, though not as dramatic as you see between this year and next. The other sources and uses, these are the contributions, again, to our special education and routine restricted maintenance program. So you see, again, those are restored for next year. And then we'll continue to increase the year after as they normally do, because both of these programs also support a lot of salaries. So again, step and column and increase to PERS and STRS applies to them. The net increase and decrease simply tells you whether we are deficit spending or not. Current year, we are not because of all the anticipated savings one time. So we're actually going to increase our beginning balance or our fund balance from 90 million on July 1st and now projected to be at 102 million on June 30th. In 21-22, the high revenues help us because at first interim, we were projected to deficit spend by even a higher amount. In this case, because of the high revenues, we are only projected to deficit spend by 9 million, reducing our ending balance to an ending balance of 93 million. And then in 22-23, I think this is a year that I consider to be more accurate because now there's no hold harmless. This is more of a true picture of where things stand. Deficit spending over 28 million, and you can see that ending balance quickly decrease. So now we're going to take a look at our restricted side of the house. And on the restricted general fund, this is where our categoricals, this is where our grants. These are all of the monies that we receive for specific purposes. And when you take a look at federal revenues, you're going to see a pretty high increase or a variance of over $8 million to our federal revenues. And that's a result of the ESSER 3, or the additional stimulus package that was approved a couple weeks ago. We have recognized some of these revenues. We recognized $10 million of it. And so once you added that and we had adjustments to others, it was a net effect of 8.3 million. And so you can see on the restricted side, that accounted for the majority of the increase in the revenues. When you look at expenditures, even though there's a large variances in each of the categories, overall our expenditures are only increasing 166,000. So why do we see all these variances? At the beginning of the year, when we had budgeted for most of these stimulus funds, most of them were in the category of books and supplies. Since then, as we've spent the money where it's needed, we've had to adjust. And that's why here it looks like there's $6 million savings to books and supplies. That's just because we moved the budget to services, $5.5 million, to classified salaries, for example, and then had some savings in certificated salaries. So overall, it was only a change of 166,000, though it looks like there was just a lot of activity between accounts. When you take a look at the contributions, this is the offset to the special education contribution that we saw earlier on the unrestricted side. So we are projecting to spend less, and so we need to bring in less revenue. And that's why you see the $500,000 difference on this slide. Now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the different funding, because we keep hearing additional funds for learning loss. We hear about CARES, we hear about ESSER. So what do all these monies mean? This here is a breakdown of the different types of funding, federal and state. Most of them are federal, that the district has received. And what I did here is I noted what the spending deadline was, because we started to receive some of these funds early on with the offset of the pandemic. And then others, for example, ESSER 3, this was the one that was just approved a couple weeks ago. I've also noted what the district allocation is for each of the categories, and then have indicated which ones have been spent. So for example, the first category, these were the learning loss mitigation funds. So when Dr. Kidzura gives his update and he talks about the PPE, the temperature scanners, the plexiglass, the air scrubbers, as we have visited schools, all of that we spent with, or we were able to fund using these learning loss or coronavirus relief funds. And that money is pretty much all spent. In addition to that, we received from the state, they're in the green, Proposition 98 funds, about $3 million that also need to be spent by this year, which we will not have a problem doing that. GEAR, or the Government Education, Governor's Emergency Education Relief is what GEAR stands for. And those funds will also be spent by June 30th. And then in that orange, you have ESSER 1, which was that first stimulus package, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. ESSER 3 is the one that we've only built in $10 million in our budget. The rest we have not recognized, and will probably not recognize until the following budget. That's when we've incorporated it into our multi-year projections. We don't anticipate spending any of that money. And then the bottom one was a state allocation of $537,000. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this money, because you're going to see that the multi-year projections have some ending fund balances that you would probably not see on the restricted side. But that's because we've received some of these funds and we don't plan to spend them all, especially when we've been given different deadlines. Because remember, this is the money that we're going to have to use for the protection equipment, for the PPE. we've all seen student dividers at our campuses. Well, they're probably not going to last 3 years. So depending on when when we have needs is when some of this money will be spent. Are there any questions on this slide?
So there's no SB 86 money in here?
That is correct. The SB 86 money was just, we just became aware of those funds, and there are no SB 86 funds built into this budget or the out years. That would all be in addition to. Mr. Peden, you're on mute.
But I clicked it. Can you go over the orange level one more time? I wasn't able to follow.
Okay. So in regards to the orange, back when the pandemic began in March, it was shortly after, we were allocated as a result of the CARES Act ESSER 1 monies. ESSER simply stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. We received these funds and were given an expiration date of September 30th, 2022. Then in December, with the stimulus package approved at the federal level, there was an additional round of ESSER funds, ESSER 2, which these funds have a spending deadline of September of 2023. And then just, a couple weeks ago with the approval of the third stimulus package at the federal level are the ESSER 3 funds.
And you mentioned that which one are we not spending down yet?
We have only started to spend ESSER 1. We have not touched ESSER 2 or ESSER 3.
Got it. Thank you.
So are those restricted as to what they can be spent on, or can we spend those for whatever we need?
No, good question. Thank you for bringing that up. They all have specific purposes. They revolve around, we can use it for learning loss, work on social emotional, meals, anything regarding the safety. So making sure that we have the measures in place to ensure things like physical distancing. So the face mask, all of the protective gear, anything to assist with distance learning. So we have a list, and the guidelines are pretty similar for ESSER 1, 2, and 3.
Sounds like we have a lot of leeway with those funds then.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is that only elementary level?
This would be for the entire district.
The entire district. Okay, I thought what was the acronym again?
ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief.
Got it. I missed the second. Okay, thank you.
No problem. And the reason I wanted to go over that slide is that recognizing that most of those funds were received in 2021, you can see that the revenues are much higher in current year than they are next year. But even next year, we still are incorporating the rest of those ESSER 3 funds. And in 22-23, you see that those revenues continue to decline. So in normal times, our restricted budget is not this large. But because we have the stimulus funds, this is what's really giving us a picture that's a little different than we would see in normal times. In addition to that, obviously our expenditures are also a little bit different. And so we've tried to plan when expenditures will be spent because we have two goals. We want to make sure that number one, we're meeting the needs as items come up. And then number two, we want to make sure that we don't spend all the funds so that come the 23-24 school year, that if we need things like PPE, that we're still planning for that. Otherwise, it's going to have an impact to our unrestricted general fund. So when you look at our beginning balance for this restricted fund, it's $11 million is what it was on July 1st, projected to end the year with 21 million. Next year, ending with 22 million. And then you can see that moving forward for 23-24, 22-23, I apologize. Again, it's not until 23-24 that the last of the stimulus monies will be spent. So you will continue to see the stimulus funds have an impact on our restricted general fund. So now as we take a look at our ending fund balance, a lot of things have changed since first interim. And, we've picked up savings on both unrestricted and restricted. So you can see that our ending fund balance is projected to increase by 20 million on the unrestricted side, almost $8 million on the restricted side, for a combined total of over 28 million. And again, just referencing that in regards to the unrestricted, 12.6 million of that is tied to our supplemental and concentration funds that are in the LCAP. You probably remember this slide from first interim, and things have changed, right? And so when you take a look at information, these are actuals through 1920. That's when the last fiscal year that was closed. 2021 and forward are all projections. But you can see that now with the influx of stimulus funds, we are going to be seeing larger ending fund balances based on what the information we have today. One thing I do want to point out is that the unrestricted percentages or the unrestricted fund balance is the blue part. So what you're seeing is that even though the combined percentage as a whole is close to 20% or over, the actual percentage of unrestricted, which is our operational budget, is actually shrinking or is lower as the years go by. And that's because we are deficit spending on the unrestricted side. And so you can see that in 1920, the unrestricted fund balance was over 23%. But by the time we get to 22, 23, it's only going to be slightly over 15%. And again, it's not until 23, 24 that we're going to feel that we're going to be able to see that true picture once all the stimulus funds are spent. One thing I do want to point out on the stimulus funds, you do have to spend that money. Otherwise, the funds would need to be returned. But based on our percentages and based on the updated information, I'm also happy to report that there will be no need to borrow money. I know earlier in the year we had talked about a possible trans or tax revenue anticipation notes, but based on these new conditions, there will be no need for a trans for current year. I'll talk a little bit about Assembly Bill, Senate Bill 86. Again, this we did not incorporate any of these dollar amounts into our financials. This information was just received not too long ago, but I wanted to focus on the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant and just go over some of the things that this would allow us to spend the funds on. Again, these are grants that are looking to address the student needs. So looking at things like extended learning time, could be summer, could be after school, could be Saturday school as well. There's an emphasis on professional development, looking at programs to address social emotional learning, access to school meals. So that continues to be a big component of all of the stimulus funds. And again, now with Senate Bill 86, it would require that districts adopt a plan by June 1st, detailing how these funds would be spent. And as a district, we would receive the funding, half of it in May, half of it in August of 2021. And we would be allowed to use these funds through August 31st of 2022. The estimated amount for our district would be just under $30 million. And again, I have not incorporated the revenues, but I also have not incorporated any expenditures associated with the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant. Our next steps in May, which is just around the corner, the governor is going to release an updated 21-22 May revision. This is his update to the January proposal. So we will take all of that information and incorporate it into our budget assumptions. In June, the district will be adopting the 21-22 budget, as well as the 21-22 LCAP. And then in September, the unaudited actuals report, again, is that report where we close and we finalize the 2020-21 fiscal year. And with that, I will take any questions.
Board, is there any questions? I don't have any. I think everything was really comprehensive and went to every question that I would have had.
I just want to thank you, Susan, for your staff for, such a good, thorough report and easy to understand. Thank you.
My only comment is that I think the business department, business section is to be commended for presenting a positive certification while other districts are struggling and they're getting into the either qualified or even negative couple. That having a positive certification is a great message to the district, to the entire community. So thank you, Susanna, and your entire division for doing that.
Definitely a big thank you to the staff, our director of business, our accounting supervisor, our accountants who put countless hours, some weekends on making sure that we had accurate information to present this evening.
Yeah, and thank you, Susanna, for the work that you've done as well, you and your team. You can tell that you guys have put a lot of time into it and did a lot of coordinating as well, because you couldn't have gotten the things done that you did do without coordinating with inside and even outside of the district. So thank you so much for that wonderful report and for the work and the time that you put in to ensure that we stay solvent.
Yes, Susanna, my only question would be, I guess it is a question, as it relates to how do we mitigate some of the concerns that you brought up in the financial report as it relates to expenditures and unrestricted funds, et cetera, in out years? Do you have any thoughts? Have that been discussed at all?
One of the things is that, remember, the enrollment projections are just that. They're projections based on what we know today. So we're hopeful that the 450 decline that is being projected for next year is too high, and that actually we don't lose as many students. That would definitely help. The other is, if you noted, one of our assumptions is we're using a 94% attendance rate. So focusing on attendance and being able to generate a higher attendance, I think, is definitely a win-win for everyone, right? Students are receiving the instruction that they need, and we're generating the additional revenues for that as well. So there's definitely things that can happen. We also, still continue to, as a district, are reviewing every request for any positions that come through, and we review that with cabinet and with superintendent, and we continue to monitor expenses. So I think that as things are needed, the conversations take place. And with so many unknowns, if something isn't needed right now, we don't have a problem delaying that or waiting until we have more information. So I think we're doing all the things that we need to do. And it's been a collaborative effort. I think principals, department heads, we all are working together, and everybody understands, and we continue to share this information. JFMC has been great. We review interim reports. We review high item expenditures, some of these stimulus packages, for example, when we're making those purchases, it's reviewed in JFMC. We're gonna, when we are bargaining, we also share financial information. So I think the information is communicated, and I think everybody, again, just working collaboratively on making sure that we all understand what is needed.
So much. I appreciate that. Board, is there any other discussion or we entertain a motion? Mr. Holguin?
Yeah, I move that we approve the second interim report as presented.
Second?
I'll second.
Second. Roll call, please.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Dr. Locke, Mr. Holguin,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Peden.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. All right, and with that, on to D, adjournments. With no further business to come before the Board of Education, the special meeting is adjourned at 5:45. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.